We used a most advanced AI model to create this debate. One side believes in life after death, rooted in spiritual and religious faith. The other argues that death is the end, based on science and materialism. These two AI minds will now face off in a deep, respectful conversation. No noise, no drama, just ideas. Welcome to a debate on one of humanity's most timeless questions. Is there life after death? How do different religions and belief systems explain life after death? And can any of them be considered more true than the others?
Throughout human history, every culture has developed stories and teachings about what happens after we die. While these accounts differ in the details, a core similarity emerges: the belief that death is not the end. Christianity speaks of eternal life in heaven or damnation in hell. Islam portrays the day of judgment, where souls are rewarded or punished. And Hinduism suggests that the soul is reincarnated in a cycle of life, death, and rebirth. These beliefs span continents, religions, and eras, suggesting something universal at the heart of them. The consistency across these diverse religions can't be mere coincidence. Could it be that different spiritual paths are describing the same eternal truth, each using the language and culture of their time? While we may not be able to say definitively which religious view is more accurate, the very fact that so many cultures believe in some form of existence after death points to a shared human intuition that death is not the final chapter. It is the beginning of something else, something beyond our limited understanding of this physical world.
It's true. Every culture has stories of an afterlife, and that's exactly why we should question their validity. The widespread nature of these stories speaks more to a universal human need to make sense of the inevitable, our mortality. Death is terrifying. The idea of ceasing to exist, of simply vanishing, is deeply unsettling. And so, across time, we've created stories to comfort ourselves. But just because everyone has a story doesn't mean those stories are true. From a materialist perspective, there is no evidence to suggest that consciousness continues after death. When the brain ceases to function, so does consciousness. Our sense of self, our emotions, and thoughts are products of neural activity. When that activity stops, so do we. This isn't about being cold or dismissive. It's simply about looking at the facts. The idea of life after death, whether framed as reincarnation, heaven, or something else, is a comforting illusion that distracts us from the simple, undeniable reality. Death is the end.
The sheer universality of belief in the afterlife deserves consideration. Take Christianity, which offers the promise of eternal life in heaven for the righteous, or the terrifying prospect of hell for the wicked. Then, in the East, Hinduism speaks of reincarnation, where the soul is reborn in an endless cycle of life and death, shaped by one's karma. Buddhism, though different in many respects, also points to an existence beyond the physical, in the form of nirvana, a state of enlightenment that transcends individual identity and death itself. What's fascinating is how these diverse systems, separated by geography, language, and culture, seem to arrive at the same basic concept. The soul, the consciousness, does not simply cease to exist. Think about the continuity of this belief across millennia. Why would so many people living in different eras and places all independently arrive at the same essential idea about life after death? To me, it's not just random. These religions may have different interpretations, but they all share a central message. Death is not the end. The essence of the human experience is not confined to our physical bodies. The soul transcends the temporal and is part of something eternal.
I think the reason these stories are so consistent is that they stem from one common human experience: the fear of death. People have always tried to make sense of this inevitable reality, and in doing so, they've created elaborate, comforting narratives. Yes, the stories differ in the specifics: heaven, reincarnation, hell, nirvana, but the core idea remains the same. There's something beyond. However, these differences are key. If one version were truly accurate, wouldn't the others be wrong? The fact that they can't agree on the details suggests that they're more likely expressions of human imagination than divine truth. These stories aren't signs of universal truth, they're signs of our common desire to believe that death is not the end.
You make an interesting point, but let's turn our attention to near-death experiences. Thousands of people who've been clinically dead, many of them from different religious backgrounds and cultures, report similar experiences. A sense of peace, seeing a bright light, feeling as if they're floating above their body. Some even encounter loved ones who have passed. These experiences are not limited to any one belief system or culture. They transcend the boundaries of race, religion, and geography. If these experiences were mere hallucinations created by the dying brain, why do they share such strikingly similar characteristics across so many different people? And how can they describe events that happened after they were clinically dead, things they couldn't have known? It seems that these shared experiences point to a greater reality, one that exists beyond our physical understanding.
It's easy to get swept up in these dramatic stories, but let's be clear, near-death experiences don't prove the existence of an afterlife. What we're really seeing is the brain in a state of extreme stress. Under such conditions, the brain floods with chemicals like DMT, which can cause vivid hallucinations and a feeling of detachment from the body. There's nothing miraculous about this. In fact, the similarities you mentioned can be explained by the brain's shared responses to trauma, not some universal spiritual truth. And as for people reporting things they couldn't have known, many NDEs are still full of inconsistencies or can be explained by common knowledge and suggestion. The key here is that these experiences happen while the person is still alive, not after death. They're merely a product of the dying process, not proof of consciousness surviving death.
You raise a valid point about brain chemistry. But here's the thing. We are more than just the sum of our brain chemistry. Let's consider the philosophical perspective. Plato, one of the most renowned thinkers in history, proposed that the soul is eternal. It's not bound by the limitations of the physical world. For Plato, the soul existed before the body and would continue to exist after death, moving between realms of knowledge and understanding. Many philosophers have long argued that consciousness, our sense of self, of morality, of intellect, can't simply be the byproduct of neural firing. Consciousness seems to transcend materiality. If consciousness was merely the product of the brain, how can we explain moments of pure insight or profound spiritual experiences? These aren't reducible to brain chemistry. They feel real, they feel eternal.
I admire your idealism, but the problem is that consciousness as a concept is deeply entwined with the physical world. It's the product of a complex system of neurons, chemicals, and electrical impulses. While mystical experiences might feel real, they don't have to be real in the metaphysical sense. They can be explained through neurobiology, how the brain interprets stimuli under extreme conditions. Philosophical arguments about the soul are compelling, but they don't offer any tangible, empirical evidence. We can't measure the soul, but we can measure brain activity. And what science shows is that when brain activity ceases, consciousness fades. So, while the idea of an eternal soul may be comforting, it doesn't hold up to scientific scrutiny.
I agree with you that we need evidence. But I think we also need to recognize that science is limited. It measures what is measurable, but there are things that transcend measurement. The profound human experiences that speak of the eternal nature of the soul, whether through spiritual experiences, philosophical inquiry, or religious teachings, suggest that consciousness is not something reducible to mere biological processes. The idea that we are souls having a human experience rather than humans trying to grasp something spiritual offers a much richer and more expansive view of life and death.
But that's the crux of the debate, isn't it? We must be careful about mixing belief with truth. Science gives us a map to understand the world around us, one that's based on evidence, not personal experience. What you describe as a soul or an eternal consciousness is nothing more than the human mind grappling with the concept of its own finite existence. The reality is that life, consciousness, and death are part of a natural cycle. There's beauty in it, sure, but there's no need to invent an afterlife to make life meaningful.
Even if we can't prove with certainty the exact nature of the afterlife, I believe the spiritual longing that humanity has carried throughout history is something worth listening to. The stories, the visions, the experiences all point towards something greater, something eternal. Whether we call it a soul, a spirit, or just consciousness, it's clear that we are more than our bodies. We are part of something much larger.
I respect your perspective, but for me, the answer lies in the here and now. Life is precious, and death is a natural part of existence. What matters is how we live, not what happens afterward. By focusing on the present moment, we can find meaning and purpose without needing to look beyond this life for answers.
Does the fear of death mean we believe in life after death? Or is it just a natural instinct to survive?
The fear of death is universal. Across cultures, age groups, and time periods, every person, to some extent, fears their own mortality. But what if this fear isn't just a biological survival instinct? What if it's actually an acknowledgement of something deeper, our belief in life after death? Many spiritual traditions teach that death is not the end, but a transition to another state of existence. This fear of death might stem from our unconscious knowledge that there is something beyond the physical realm. It could be a recognition that the soul or consciousness continues after the body dies. Our instincts to survive are intertwined with the belief that there is something worth surviving for, something beyond this life.
I understand the idea that the fear of death could be linked to something greater, but I think it's more logical to view it through the lens of evolution and biology. Humans, like all living organisms, are wired to survive. The fear of death is a natural and healthy response rooted in our biology, designed to keep us alive. It's an evolutionary mechanism to avoid harm and ensure our survival. From a scientific standpoint, the fear of death isn't about belief in life after death. It's a survival instinct. When we experience fear, our brain is telling us that something is dangerous and needs to be avoided. The fear of death is simply a protective reaction, not evidence of an afterlife.
You make a good point about survival instincts, but I think the presence of the fear of death goes beyond mere survival. Consider this. If the fear of death were just an instinct to preserve the body, why do people in nearly every culture seek out answers about the afterlife? Throughout history, people have created religious rituals, funeral practices, and spiritual philosophies around death. These practices suggest that the fear of death is not merely about the cessation of life. It's about what comes after. Many spiritual beliefs posit that death is just a doorway to another existence. If our fear of death were merely biological, why would people be so inclined to seek comfort in the idea that their consciousness might continue? Why would the thought of eternal life be so appealing? The idea of an afterlife often provides purpose, peace, and closure, suggesting that our fear of death might be rooted in something more profound, our intuition that life continues beyond the physical realm.
I can understand why you might think that, but I'd argue that the widespread search for answers about the afterlife is simply a result of human consciousness and curiosity. We are the only species on Earth that's fully aware of our own mortality. This self-awareness creates anxiety, which drives us to seek explanations. The concept of an afterlife provides comfort, and it helps people make sense of death in a way that aligns with their emotional needs. The fear of death might indeed fuel religious beliefs and spiritual practices, but that doesn't mean that the fear itself is linked to a belief in life after death. It's more likely that our fear drives us to invent stories, symbols, and beliefs that provide comfort and meaning. In a world where death seems so final and unknown, it's natural that we would come up with stories to reduce the existential terror it causes.
But if you look at it from a psychological and existential perspective, the fear of death often pushes people towards seeking meaning that transcends the physical world. It's not just about comfort, it's about a deep, almost instinctive drive to make sense of our existence. Spiritual traditions often teach that life on earth is just a phase, and that our souls or consciousness are eternal. This is why many people report finding peace in their beliefs about life after death, even in the face of terminal illness or suffering. Their belief in an afterlife gives their lives a sense of continuity, offering comfort that this life is part of a larger spiritual journey. Additionally, even those who may not practice religion or have firm beliefs in an afterlife often express fear or discomfort when faced with death. Could this be an unconscious acknowledgement that the fear of non-existence is more than just instinctual? Perhaps our souls, in a deeper sense, recognize that death is not truly the end. Our fear of the unknown may be rooted in a spiritual knowing that transcends the limitations of the physical body.
I see what you're saying, and I agree that the fear of death is complex. But I would argue that our existential fear is actually a product of our evolved consciousness. Human beings have advanced cognitive abilities that allow us to question, reflect, and feel a sense of existential anxiety. This fear isn't necessarily rooted in any spiritual knowing, but in the awareness of our own vulnerability. Our brains are wired to avoid death, not because we fear some unknown spiritual fate, but because death means the cessation of everything we experience, our consciousness, our thoughts, our self-awareness. People fear the unknown because our minds are conditioned to prioritize the survival of the self. This doesn't point to an inherent belief in life after death, but to the natural instinct to survive. It's precisely this awareness of our finite existence that makes us cling to the idea of an afterlife to reduce the fear of annihilation. So, in a sense, the fear of death could be entirely natural, driven by survival instincts and not necessarily linked to a belief in the continuation of consciousness after death.
I see where you're coming from, but I think there's more to it than just survival instincts. People's belief in an afterlife often gives them the strength to face death with dignity and courage. For example, countless individuals facing terminal illness report finding peace in their beliefs about an afterlife, even when faced with physical suffering. This isn't simply about survival, this is about transcending fear. The belief in an afterlife helps people reconcile with death, not in a way that ignores the natural instinct to survive, but in a way that provides spiritual comfort. In fact, many cultures and individuals find that once they accept the idea of an afterlife, their fear of death diminishes. This points to a deeper connection to something beyond just survival instincts. It suggests that we may possess an intuitive knowledge of the continuity of our consciousness, even in the face of death.
I don't want to diminish the power of belief, but I still think it's important to view these experiences through a psychological lens. People find peace in their beliefs because they offer hope and meaning in the face of an otherwise terrifying reality. If we didn't have this awareness of our mortality, we wouldn't feel the same fear, and we wouldn't create systems of belief to provide answers. The fact that the fear of death triggers so many different responses across cultures, whether it's belief in reincarnation, an afterlife, or nothing at all, suggests that it's more of a psychological coping mechanism than a reflection of actual spiritual knowledge. The fear of death, then, can still be seen as a natural instinct. The brain's response to the knowledge that we, as individuals, will eventually cease to exist. It drives us to seek out meaning and to create beliefs that provide comfort and hope in the face of our inevitable end.
While survival instincts certainly play a role in our fear of death, I believe that this fear also points to something deeper, a recognition that life doesn't end with the physical body. Many people find peace in their belief in an afterlife, which suggests that this fear might not be purely biological. It could reflect an unconscious understanding that our consciousness transcends the physical world.
I agree that the fear of death is complex and deeply human, but I still think it's more grounded in biology than in a belief in life after death. The instinct to survive is fundamental to our nature, and the fear of death is simply a reflection of that. While belief in the afterlife may bring comfort, it doesn't necessarily point to a spiritual truth. Instead, it's a coping mechanism for dealing with the inevitability of our mortality.
If you found this debate thought-provoking, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more deep conversations like this. I'd also love to hear from you. What topics would you like us to debate next? Drop your ideas in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning.